I want to discuss today the central role of what we call Amelus B'Torah. And you and I know that Torah requires a lot of work. You know, Torah study doesn't always come easy. And I always give you a yasher koach that you're able to come. I know in Canada it's pretty early, right after davening. Hopefully the mind is clear, so that's a good point. But even though we appreciate Amelus B'Torah, but sometimes we give it a secondary role. You know, it's there in the background. It's a nice addition. Perhaps you could call it an embellishment of the mitzvah. Maybe it's Hidur mitzvah. But we're going to see today, over and over again, that the concept of Yigiyah, of hard work in Torah study is critical. It almost defines the essence of Torah study. And that which comes hard with work is so much more meaningful. It's a greater mitzvah, but it's also perhaps the essence of the mitzvah. We're going to see today a beautiful insight of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, of the Malbim, of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, and many others, as they are gathered together here under one roof in this essay in Hegioni Halacha, which I assume and I hope you've received. And David sent it out. We'll thank him when he comes. There are two different levels and two different definitions of studying Chachma, of wisdom. One is that which applies to the world at large, Chachma B'Goyim Tamin, and then there's the Chachma Satorah. And perhaps if you had to put a finger on the fundamental difference between the two studies, the engagement in the study of Chachma and that of Torah Lahavdil, perhaps we would put the finger on this concept called Yigiyas HaTorah. Because from the perspective of generally studying Chachma, wisdom, and acquiring intellectual knowledge, the amount of Amelus is irrelevant. What's relevant is only the final product. But the concept of limud mitoch yigiyah as a critical element is uniquely Jewish. It relates and reflects the study of Torah in a very unique way. It has no parallel in any other study of wisdom. Rashi already at the beginning of Parshas Bechukosai, Im Bechukosai Telechu, Rashi quotes the Maimer of Chazal. What do you mean, Im Bechukosai Telechu? It says in Mitzvot of Tishmoru. So why the repetition? Why Bechukosai Telechu? And Rashi says famously, Shetiu Amelin B'Torah. And all the schar that is presented, it unfolds itself throughout the first section of Bechukosai before we get to the negative part, Rachmana litzlan. All that schar flows from the original three words that open up that parsha, Im Bechukosai Telechu. And what we're going to try to prove is that with regard to Torah study, the bottom line or the final product is less important than the Amelus that brings you to that final product. It's exactly topsy-turvy, the exact opposite of Chachma. Whereas in Chachma, it's the knowledge that you produce, the ideas, and the understanding. That's Ikar. Yigiyah, how did you get to it? That's almost irrelevant. In Torah, it's just the opposite. How many ideas you can present, how many, ways you can boggle us with your insights and your chidushim. That's less significant than the amelus, that the work that you put in. So without further ado, given that introduction, let's begin with the Orach Chaim HaKadosh in his commentary in Shmos Chaf Hey, Parshas Truma, with regard to the Nedavos that were brought forward, the contributions to the Mishkan. And the Torah speaks about Zahav, Kesef, Unechoshes, many other precious metals that were contributed out of the full heart of the Jewish people. And again, if you look carefully at the list, you'll see it goes in descending order from that which is more important, more valuable, the Zahav, down to the less valuable, the Kesef, down to the Choshes, and it goes on and on, Tcheles, Argomon, Talashoni, and then somewhere, almost at the end of the list, is Avnei Shoam, the Avnei Miluim. All told, the number of precious gifts that are listed, enumerated here, are 13. And yet, the Seder makes sense until you get to Avnei Shoam, Avnei Miluim. These were the most precious possessions and most expensive gifts of them all. And yet, paradoxically, as the Orach Chaim is quick to point out, they appear at the end of the list. Why at the end of the list? They should have been listed first. These were the stones that were so rare, they would make up the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, had a tremendously significant role to play, very expensive on the end of the list. Comes the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and he says the following: we tend to count things based on their chashivus, their inner significance. We would call it their market value. And therefore, in our minds, it doesn't make sense that the Avnei Shoam, the Avnei Miluim are on the bottom of the list. But there's another way of counting the significance of these goods, and that's called Amelus, Tircha, Chisar, and Kiss. Not how much money you paid for it, or how much money it's worth. How much can you sell it on the market? No. That's not going to be the criterion. The criterion is going to be Amelus. And here's where the Avnei Shoam were very different than all the others. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Yoma, on Daf Ayin Hey, that the Avnei Shoam came to the possessions of the Jewish people without any tircha whatsoever. They just flew down from Shamayim. And the pasuk says that they were brought by the Nesiim, the princes of Israel, of the very Shvatim, who received this gift derech nes, by a miracle, and they were carried by the Anani HaKavod, brought down to each one of the Nesiim. And it's interesting, the word Nesiim is written chaser. It's not even mole. The yud of Nesiim, following the sin, is omitted in the Torah. And Chazal say that the Nesiim are like, in Mishlei, a kind of a ruach. They kind of are blown down into this world. And that's called, in the language of the Shas, Mishulchan Gavoa Kazoch. Gavoa means that they got it from like Hegdesh from Shamayim. And then, as we say in English, easy come, easy go. That which comes easy, it's very easy to give it away. My father used to say that he spoke to in his day, a number of young men who worked as waiters in famous hotels. And when he used to ask them the question, like, who gave the biggest tips? almost inevitably, they would say the racketeers. Easy come, easy go. Therefore, says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, the Avnei Miluim, the Avnei Shoam are listed last on the list. Because what gives something chashivus, when you worked hard to get it, to acquire it, that gives it significance. And here we want to learn an amazing insight of the Malbim. We're going to learn now the parsha of Mikra Bikurim, which is in Parshas Ki Savo. And of course, as you know, the mitzvah is every year, year in and year out, the Jewish farmer would bring his first crops, his first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Torah goes into great detail describing the entire procession, the ceremony of bringing the Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. The Samta Batena. The Torah describes how the farmers would collect their first fruits, first ripened fruits, in a utensil called a tena. And after they offered the bikurim to the mizbeach inside the tena, the kohen would receive the tena. And the Mishnah in the third parak of bikurim wants to analyze what happens to the tena itself. Is that also transferred over to the kohen, or is the tena just simply a vessel that's used to facilitate giving the kohen the fruits to be placed on the mizbeach as bikurim? And the Mishnah describes these various beautiful baskets that were used by the people to bring the bikurim. The ashirim, the rich people, would bring baskets that were made of gold or silver. As I said before, the pomp and ceremony and the beauty and the glory of Havas Bikurim is something that's hard for us to even imagine. The Aniyim, on the other hand, would bring Salim Nitzarim Shel Klipe Arava. What does this mean? They would take an Arava, I think it's called a willow in English, and they would scrape off the top, and they would use it kind of like to weave a basket. It was a lot of hard work. And the Mishnah says the following: the one fundamental difference between the tena, the sal of the aniyim, and that of the ashir, is that the sal of the ani was taken by the kohen as a gift, and it was not returned to the aniyim. Whereas the salim of the ashirim, made of gold, made of silver, were returned to their owner. Now, I ask you for an intuitive answer to the following question. Obviously, I'm looking for the wrong answer to this question. Which one of these tenas should be returned? The Nebuch the Ani worked so hard to create this sal, and the Ashir, okay, you know what? Once a year, he brings Bikurim. He's got this beautiful gold basket, but he's got a whole storehouse of beautiful vessels. You know, he's got a break front with silver and gold and everything. Which one should be given as a gift, taken in by the Mikdash, by the Kohanim, and which one should be given back to its owner? Can anybody suggest an intuitive answer? So who would you be mocked to give back the Kli? Anybody?
The Ani.
The Ani, for sure. And the Mishnah says, Pung Fakir. The Mishnah says that to the Ashirim, Hayu Akonim Achzirim Osam, whereas this precious gift of the Ani would go to the Kohanim and would be uplifted. Says the Malbim, and it's very interesting, his Pirush on Parshas Ki Tavo, many, many insights. This one I love the best. He says the following: when you bring a gift to the Kohanim, it's got to be something very special. The gift that's brought by the Aniyim with the Salim Nitzarim that are made of Haravos Klufos, that is a very precious gift. There's Tircha, there's Amelus. There's the personal nefesh. You put something into your heart and soul into it. That becomes an elevated object that should be taken in by the Kohanim in the Mikdash. Aval Hashirim, says the Malbim, Lo Tarchu v'asiyas salim haklosos. They bought it on auction. They didn't make it. They didn't produce it. There was no work involved. And even though it's Dmeim Yikarim, it's very expensive on market value, we would have certainly thought that should be sanctified as a sanctimonious gift. No. Lo tarchu v'amolu lehem. U'b'yeinei hamakom, in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ein lehem erech. What value is it? What does gold and silver mean in front of the Kisei HaKavod to the Almighty God? But the klosos of the Aniyim, as they engendered all their work, all their effort, it was a work of love that was uplifted, that represented the Amelus, and Amelus really represents the neshama of a person. That's sanctified and uplifted and deserves to be part of this gift to the Kohanim. So says the Mal. So how do you define the chashivus of a gift? Not by its value. We don't call up the auctioneers or the vendors out there in the marketplace. No. It's a reflection of the amelus, the tircha, the igia that a person puts in. That means that his neshama is there. And now we want to study the insights of the Rab David Kimchi, in his work on Hosea. The pasuk says the following: when Hosea was giving very strong tochacha, rebuke to the Jewish people, notifying them that God would punish them, God's anger is compared by the Navi to the anger of a bear. I remember when I was in the Rockies, if you didn't see a grizzly bear, you wanted your money back. So the bear, if you start up with one of its cubs, then forget it. The bear will just, whatever. The anger of the bear and the ferocious attack because of its protective feeling for its cubs is something unsurpassed in the animal kingdom. So if the Navi wants to demonstrate and communicate the profound nature of divine wrath, he uses it as a mashal, the bear, I don't know if a grizzly bear, and its anger when you take away its cubs or attack its cubs. So the Radak wants to understand, why is the bear chosen amongst the animals? Why not the king of all the animals, the lion? The Gibar Shebachayos, says the Radak, that certainly would be an anger that you wouldn't want to mess around with. The description of the roar of the lion, which creates a tremendous ripple effect throughout the entire animal kingdom. Why wasn't that used as the ultimate description in the metaphor of Hosea Navi of divine wrath? Says the Radak, based on various statements in Chazal, that the bear is very unique in this sense. When an animal gives birth to its cubs, the cubs are visual. You can see them. They're not concealed. But with regard to the cubs of a bear, and if somebody could Google this to see if this is true, I don't know if the Radak was a great scientist, I don't know, but according to this, the cub is born totally concealed. The cilia, which we call a placenta, actually surrounds the cub on all sides. And the Vlad, when it is born, looks like a piece of meat. It's totally concealed. You don't see the cub at all. The dove will spend a great deal of time and effort in removing the cilia so that the cub could survive. And how does the mother bear do such a thing? He says the hands of a bear are too thick, too dangerous for such a very delicate process. If they would use their hands to remove the cilia, they would be running a very serious risk, a security risk of injuring the cub. So we're now on page 434, if anyone's following the pages. So what does the mother bear do? She uses her tongue and sort of licks off very painstakingly the cilia, removing it with torach gadol, v'yigia atzuma, b'zehirus shalotizak havlad. Says the Radak, if you start up with the cub of a bear, you're in deep trouble, because the mother bear will not tolerate anyone touching its cubs. And why? He says, because it's maras nefesh miod. The level of anger is greater than in any other animal because of the igia and the torach that it took to guarantee that this birth process would lead to fruition, would successfully lead to the birth of the cub. And therefore, Hosea Novi, when he wants to profoundly impress us with the chastisement of the Novi, he compares divine anger to that of a bear. A bear who, with Yigia, Gedola, and Tircha, with very great, meticulous care, brought the cub to the point where it could exist. But let's get back to some of the more classic statements of Chazal. We mentioned before Rashi, in the name of the Mechilta, in Parashat Bechukosai, in Bechukosai Telechu, Shetiu Amelim B'Torah. And in the absence of Amelis B'Torah, Chazal teach us that there's an absence of Kiyum HaMitzvahs. Why? What's the connection between these two concepts, Amelis B'Torah and Kiyum HaMitzvahs? Right after in Bechukosai Telechu, which Chazal interpreted as Amelis B'Torah, Ves Mitzvosai Tishmoru. The Mitzvosai Tishmoru is contingent upon Bechukosai Telechu. And a person lacking the first level of Bechukosai Telechu of Yigia B'Torah will gradually go down and down and down until the point where Chas v'Sholom he might desecrate the very bris, the covenant between Hashem and Klal Yisrael of the Tarek Mitzvahs. And then we get to the second half of Bechukosai, of Lo Tasu Es Kol HaMitzvahs Elu Ubechukosai Timasu Ves Mishpotai Tigal Nafsham. And at the end of this entire description, Lahafer Es Brisi, says Rashi in his commentary on Bechukosai, Averos Haminuyos Kan, Rashi describes it to a chain, a sharsheres, Chulya Achuza Bechulya. As you loosen one link in the chain, it loosens the next link in the chain, on and on and on. And Rashi explains, You start with Lo Lamad B'Amelus. He didn't study Torah with that extra work. Lo Asas HaMitzvahs. That's going to lead to a lacking in mitzvahs. And then, Moes B'Acherim Ha'osim. He begins to resent those who do fulfill the mitzvahs, the Chachamim, the Tzaddikim. And at that point, because of his jealousy and his resentment, he starts preventing others from fulfilling the mitzvah. He's a Chotei Umachtias Arabin. Until finally, Rashi says, he reaches the lowest level on the entire totem pole. He's Kofer Be'ik. And it all starts with one nefila, a nefila from the top of him, B'chukosai Telecha. Because as we said before, the Amelus is essential to Limud Torah. And the Taz says that why do we make the bracha? Not Lilmo Divrei Torah, but Lasot Divrei Torah. Says the Taz, the difference between Limud, which applies to any Chachma, as opposed to Lasot Divrei Torah, which is unique to Torah, is because with regard to Limud, there's no requirement or element of Yigir that's critical. But Lasot, says the Taz, is in the famous Shulchan Aruch Siman Mem Zayin of Torah, says the Taz, it's Derech Torach Dafka. Imagine Rabbi say every morning when we recite the bracha in Nusach Ashkenaz of Lasot B'Divrei Torah, we should have in mind this Taz. Lasot B'Divrei Torah B'Derech Torach Dafka. To have that kavanah in mind, and make a radical change in our whole attitude towards Torah study, our motivation, our inspiration, and the impact that the Torah study is going to have on our neshamas. And now he quotes a Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos in the last chapter of Avos, which is called Kinyan Torah. There's the Rambam. This is so atypical of the Rambam. We think of the Rambam as the gigantic intellect. Listen to what he says. Chachma haniknes below Torach v'Amel ein lo kiyum. You can understand that on a psychological level. As we said before, easy come, easy go. But the Rambam goes to such an extreme here, it's hard to believe that he's describing a psychological phenomenon in the nature of the world. Ein lo kiyum v'ein lo adam toeles ba. No toeles to chachma that was acquired without torach v'amola. It's a double negative. If there's no torach v'amola, then there's no kiyum to the Torah. It's the Rambam. Avol kriyas tainug b'menucha. Some people, they rest themselves, smoke a pipe, and, they read a sefer, pick it up and read it, or, they fall asleep. That's tainug b'menucha. Says the Rambam, ein lo kiyum v'lo toeles. And Koheles Rabbah, the Medrash Rabbah Koheles on the pasuk Af Chachmasi Amdali. Shlomo Melech speaks about Chachmasi Amdali. I retain my knowledge, my Chachma, my wisdom, but he adds as an introduction the word Af, totally out of place. Says the Medrash Torah, very famous Medrash Torah, Shalamadati Ba'af, Bezeas Af, by the sweat of my brow. Amdali, that's going to remain with me. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter here on page 435 says that Min HaShamayim melamdin li adam Torah she'ena niknes v'amel v'ena chashuva. I have no doubt that he had in mind the Vilna Gaon who refused to receive Torah Min HaShamayim. The Malach wanted to reveal Torah to him. I don't want it. I want to achieve Torah through my own Yigiyah, my own Amilos. And that's what we're going to see when the Gemara Nida establishes that the fetus in its mother's womb is taught by the Malach Kol HaTorah Kula, and then the baby comes back and he gives him the Malach gives him a patch on the above the lips, and he forgets all the Torah. So Rabbi Yisrael Salant asked the obvious question. What's this exercise of futility? Why did the Malach bother teaching him Torah if after the pregnancy is over, he's going to force him to forget the Torah? He says this is a message that the Torah that were given gratis, without amelus, ein lo toeles klal. This is all a metaphor. Again, I'm not saying it's not to be taken literally. Don't misunderstand me. What I mean by a metaphor is that even something described by Chazal in the physical universe has meaning beyond the physical. It's a message, a symbolic idea that's being conveyed here. What's being conveyed? Why forget all the Torah that you learned? The answer is because you were given it gratis without any amilus. It's therefore meshachrin also. Again, many times I thought about this idea, why bother with the Malach teaching you? And again, if you don't mind, again, you can put me in Cherem if you like, but I found the answer in a book by Socrates, the great Jewish Greek philosopher. Socrates, when he talks about education in a book called The Republic, which I only know from my graduate studies, he describes how you can make a child learn, especially mathematics. And he says, ultimately, if the child is going to learn, the child has to learn on his own. You have to guide him step by step. But ultimately, in order for the knowledge to seep in, he's got to figure it out himself. But what you teach a person somehow is always there in, I guess, what maybe in modern psychological terms we call the subconscious mind. You remember, and it's probably even true today, but certainly in the initial stages of how do you say hashtalot in English? Transplants. Sorry, it took me a word. I haven't heard the word in a good couple of years. So the greatest danger in a transplant was what's called rejection. You remember this? So if, let's say, you take a cornea from another being, another alive or dead, and you transplant it, or transplant a kidney, any other organ, there's always a fear of rejection. It's a foreign body that you're introducing in the recipient, and that organism might reject it. And science, over the course of decades and decades, has worked very hard to develop both drugs and different procedures to figure out when there's a match between the donor and the recipient, which reduces the level or the statistical probability of rejection. The same is true in the world of knowledge. If you teach a child something that comes from an entirely different world, there's a fear of rejection. It's so foreign to the child. It's so alien. It doesn't ring a bell. It doesn't resonate. When the Malach teaches the child Torah, that Torah knowledge seeps in to the very nefesh of the child. The child will forget all that Torah. So don't ask him Shnayim Otzim V'Talis after he's born. But Shnayim Otzim V'Talis now becomes something that's not foreign to him. It's left its reshimo on his soul. And now when he relearns it, he's not learning it for the first time. Right? The Chazal always say, Kosha Atiki Mechadati. That which is new is much more difficult to study. But that which is given to him gratis, that becomes part of his essence, but he's going to forget all that Torah. And that's because of Amelus. There was no Amelus. When a person connects to Torah, he does so through Amelus. Amelus is the greatest means to be makasher yourself, to connect yourself to Torah study. Amar Rabbi Meir. In the Mishnah in Avos, Rabbi Meir is quoted as saying, Im amalta b'Torah, nosim l'cha schar harba. What does it mean, Im amalta b'Torah? He should have said, Im lamadet Torah, nosim lo schar harba. As I fracted Tosas Yontif. Says it, Tosas Yontif Heller, he lived about 4 centuries ago. He says the following: why would Rabbi Meir medayek and he said im amalta b'Torah nosim lo schar harbe, not im lamadet Torah. Says the Tosas Yontif, haschar mishtalem li adam lefi rov amolo v'terchasa. The schar is commensurate to the amount of amelus that he put in, not to ribuy alimud. So there's a better, echad amar b'echad amamit, fine, but who's going to get the greatest schar? That's why in B'chukosei Telechu it says, V'salachti v'sochechem, Rashi compares it to a vision of the Shechina leading you through Gan Eden, take you for a tiyul. Says the Chofetz Chaim, we've all heard this, and this part of the Chofetz Chaim is repeated almost at every siyum, and certainly at the siyum Hashas. When a person leaves the Beis Medrash, according to the Gemara in Brachos, Chav Chesam and Beis, he recites the following: Modani l'fanecha Hashem Elokai shesamta chalki miyoshvei Beis HaMedrash v'lo samta chalki miyoshvei Kronos. Ani omer v'hem amelu. Ani omer u'mekabel schar. Hem amelu v'eina mekabel schar. So the Chofetz Chaim asks the obvious question: what does it mean, hem amelu v'eina mekabel schar? There's a simile here to an uman who's doing work and is paid wages for his labor. And what if a person is an uman and he works in his malacha? He doesn't deserve schar? We're not going to pay him? He doesn't get wages for that? Says the Chofetz Chaim, there's a fundamental difference. The schar of the uman is commensurate to the malacha, not to the amelus. The final product is what we're going to pay him for. If he were a magician, abracadabra, he could produce the same object, the same item, we pay him the same wages. There's no need to pay him for his amelus. So Heim Amelim, they do malacha, but Einam Akablim schar. They won't get schar for the amelus. Heim Amelim, the Einam Akablim schar for amelus. They'll get schar for the final product. But Ono Amelim umekablim schar. Our schar is not market value. Show me tachlis what I can sell in the wares in the street. No. That's true for the goyim. For Heim Amelim, their amelus is not relevant at all. Where they did tircha, they didn't do tircha. They did amelus, they didn't. What's the final product? How much is it worth on the market? Locain b'limat Torah, says the Chofetz Chaim. Scharo shel halomed is commensurate to his yegia. Lefum tzara agra. Ani amel, anachnu amelim, umekablim schar. We'll get schar lefi amelus. That, as we saw, is going to give us the kiyum of Torah, the kiyum of mitzvahs. It's all a reflection of the amelus, and that which comes easy, I don't care how much it's worth on the market. That's not relevant. That's not the measuring rod and the barometer of schar of chashivus. We live in a society, we're so influenced by the marketing society that we live in. What can you market? What can you sell? How much money does it bring in when it's put in up for sale on the show in the shuk? You want to know what it's worth? Get an estimate. You want to sell something in an auction? First thing is the auction house will send over an assessor to evaluate its value, how much it's going to bring in. And that mentality is seeped into our minds, into our psyches. And we use that measuring rod for everything in life, unfortunately, because we're so influenced by that competitive marketing society. How much is it worth? Every good businessman will evaluate the expenditures and the assets. How much does it cost me to invest? And what will it bring in when I sell it? That's the mentality that we work with, and we apply it in every area of life. But the concept of Amilut Torah as the critical element in Torah study is antithetical to that entire attitude that we're so used to. In Torah study, what's critical is the Amelus. And for the Amelus, we are Makabel Tzchak. And here we have an insight of the Meshech Chochmah, Rameir Simcha Mitvinsk, on the top of page 436, if you're following in song. The Mishnah says, in the second parak of Avos, Na'alifnei mi'ata omel, b'neman bal malachtecha she'yishalim l'cha schar pulosecha. Says Rameir Simcha, why does it open up with the statement, Na'alifnei mi'ata omel? That's very strange. It ends up with schar pulosecha, so it just said Na'alifnei mi'ata poel. But he says the following. Let's say a person studies Torah and never he forgets his Torah. Don't we all forget our Torah? Even though there's a separate Isur, the Rambam counts it in Taryag of Pen Tishkach. But Chazal say that's a person whose life is such that he purposely, intentionally forgets his Torah. But there's another person who honestly pursues the study of Torah, tries the best he can do, puts in his time with Mesiras Nefesh, and he forgets his Torah. Not everyone was blessed with such a memory. I have one or two friends of mine that are unbelievable. You start a sentence, they heard it 50 years ago, they'll remember it. Afim Tishkach, says Rameir Simcha, Becholzos Golui Lefanav. Why? Afal Pisha Ein Lo Toeles B'Talmudo Eino Biyado. And for those who learn Daf Yomi, I'm talking about new recruits. And new recruits could be within the last 50 years. They only did it 7 times over, right? You'll ask them questions about what they learned 2 days ago. Again, the geniuses of them will remember, or those who've gone through it so many times. For most of us, we're lucky if we're oriented in the question. But there's a certain level of Mesiras Nefesh, of Yegia and Amelus. And that's why Rabbi Meir says, Da mifnei mi'ata omel, because Neman Baal Malachtecha, she'yishalim l'scha schar pulosecha, for what? Because you are omel b'Torah. The Torah is not in your hands. You don't have it. You don't retain it. We ask you questions and you've forgotten it. But there was Amelus. And now we want to study the insight of the Maharal Prague to a Gemara in Masechta Bava Kama. This is a famous Gemara about being Poresh Min HaTorah. What does it mean, Poresh Min HaTorah? In this particular context, Shimon Amsuni says the following. Every S in the Torah comes for a reboot. He gets to the pasuk Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, and he's stumped. Can't figure out what could be a ribui for Yiras Hashem. What's beyond Yiras Hashem? L'Rabos is what? Till Rabbi Akiva comes along. And at that point, Shimon Amsuni makes the following statement. They ask him, what are you going to do with all the S'im that you darshan until now? Once you have one S and it has no ribui, basically you could throw overboard all the drashos and all the limudim that you were involved in for the whole course of your life. Was it worth it? Now you're throwing it all overboard? Says Reb Shimon, Kishem shekivalti schar ala drisha, kacha kabel schar ala prisha. Frek the Maharal, what does this mean? Okay, kacha kabel schar ala prisha. You'll get duly rewarded when you admit and you confess and concede that you made a mistake. All those rushes of Esim, throw it out the window. But why do you say Kishem she akabel schar ala drisha? What do you mean ala drisha? What schar do you deserve for the drisha? Well, now you're throwing it all out. Beautiful kasha, the Maharal. But his answer is so stunning. Kevan shebitchila hayishimon amsuni savar shumuchavin laemes v'drashas esin shebatorah. Nosem lo schar ala drishos ki'ilu heim emes. Look how great, says the Maharal Prague, is the Amelus in Torah. Perhaps, I mean, it's just my little footnote here on the side. Maybe that gives us sheds another light on Elu ve'elu divrei kim chayim. Why do I sweat and work so hard to understand Beit Shammai when we pass like Beis Hillel in most cases? But the answer is Elu ve'elu. The Iker is the Amelus, and if I work hard to understand Beit Shammai, Elu ve'elu, that's also schar. Says the Maharal, the klal, with regard to Limud Torah, is kasher yefaresh echad min hachachamim b'talmud pirush al pasuk. One of the chachmei haTalmud will interpret a pasuk. V'nidcha also perish, and it was rejected, as we say in Yiddish, it was slugged up. Chas v'sholom sheyeh amelu levatola. Again, it's such a concept that's so antithetical to secularism. Well, what's your amelus worth? At the end of the day, your experiment flopped. So you worked and you toiled, very nice, but it's worthless. What are we going to pay you for that? What do we have at the end of the day? Chas v'sholom, says the Maharal with regard to Torah study. Afal pisha nidche oso aperush amolo shelo eno levatola. Again, to falsify and distort the truth in Torah, chas v'sholom. I mean, that's a terrible, terrible avera. Maybe a hari val yavar, I don't know. But you meant for truth, you machaven, and based on your understanding of Torah and Emes, this is what it says, and this is how we interpret it. That's amelus. That's valuable in and of itself. It's an end unto itself, and it deserves reward. Kishem shekabel schar ala prisha. Kishem shekabel schar ala drisha. Kacha kabel schar ala prisha. Why schar ala drisha? There's the Maharal, because that drasha was based on your understanding of Torah. Now, At the time of the Trumas Hadeshen, about 5 centuries ago, it was very common that they used to learn Torah on a round, what's the word I want to use? On a turning table. What would be a word for that? Like if you put a table on wheels and then you just can turn it around and around. Like, so you want to get to a sefer that's on the other side of the table. You don't even have to get up from your table, says the Trumas Hadeshen. What would you call it?
I think a Lazy Susan is what you're thinking of.
Maybe that's a company name.
Yeah, it's a round board on the top of a table which just rotates around.
It rotates. That's the word I want to use. A rotating table.
And so that anybody in the table can turn it to get whatever food is located on
They probably have those, those things that you hold. What do you call it? Like a handle kind of thing, and you turn it around. So the Trumas Hadeshen came out against this table. B'tokef, he was opposed to it. On the top page 437. He says the following. What you're doing is you're reducing Torah study to a Maise Pinuk V'idun. This is for people who don't want to work too hard. I don't want to have to stand up and go to the other side of the table in order to access a certain sefer that I need. He says, Yesh bazeh ikuv. This is a barrier. You think it facilitates, it makes it easier to learn Torah, says the Trumas Hadeshen. He was a very original thinker. His name was Itzul. That this is an ikuv. Shalo yidbeku divrei Torah belibo shalalomhev. V'lo yizkarem, he won't remember his Torah. Because he's got to stand up and make that effort to circuit around the table and retrieve the sefer. Osam habachurim hashirim hamafunakim she'asa lehem shulchanos sheyoshvim komon v'hofkim es hashulchan le'ezet tzad sheyirtzev olav sfarim lo tov hemos. We think that's great. You'll pay the carpenter an extra schar for facilitating the Torah, the study of Torah. Adarabah, he says. Dafka k'shemavakesh achar sefer ubalo b'torah gadol. He says such Torah will be retained by him. Unbelievable chiddush. And if you take a look in the Shulchan Aruch Yeridei Siman Reish Mem Vav Hilchos Talmud Torah, it says, "Ein divrei Torah miskaimim b'misha misrape atzmo alehem, v'lo belomdim mitocha idun." Language of Yosef Karo in Shulchan Aruch. Lomdim mitocha idun. Don't we want to make Torah study as easy as possible? Okay, in our generation, I don't think you can apply this yardstick, frankly. You want to make it as easy and as accessible as possible for people. We live in a world of kiruv. We have to bring people around to study Torah. You can make it more difficult for them, they're going to just drop it. But the conceptual structure that's being created here by the Trumas Hadeshen, that limud Torah mitoch idun, and it has the Mishnah say, Paspa mel kochal, or it's Tishan. That's Hamelus b'Torah. And here we look at a Gemara in Masechta Menachos Daf Zayin. The Gemara tells us about Avimi, who is the Rebbe of Rav Chisda. And Avimi forgot Masechta Menachos. Again, whatever that means. So he went to his Talmud Rav Chisda, and he asked his Talmud to review Masechta Menachos. Jolt my memory. So the Gemara asks, why did the Rebbe go to the Talmud? Why did Avimi go to Rav Chisda? It should have been the opposite. He should have summoned Rav Chisda, subpoenaed him, you're my Talmud, come into my house, make the shlep, and teach me Masechta Menachos. The Gemara answers that Avimi made a deliberate decision. He didn't want to limit his tircha. He wanted to expand his tircha. Ha-tircha mo'ila l'limud. Maybe he didn't do enough Yegiya and Tircha when he learned Menachos the first time around. That's why he forgot it. He's not going to risk a second time forgetting Menachos. And therefore Chazal say, Yogata umatzasa tam, the Gemara at the end of Megillah. If there's Yegiya, then matzasa, then you can find it. And then it's yours, and you make a kinyan on it. And therefore Avimi would rather go into exile, so to speak, leave his own comfortable safety zone, comfort zone, and go to his Talmud in order to study Torah from his Talmud. And the Gemara tells us that Miyamos Moshe v'yad Rabbi Gamliel hayu lomdin Torah me'umad. Have you ever tried to study Torah standing? I mean, it's great if you don't want to fall asleep, but it's a lot of work to stand for hours and hear Torah before Rabbi Gamliel's passing. That's how Torah was transmitted. The Talmidim would stand. But after the death of Rabbi Gamliel, the people were too weak, and Yard the Chul Sholiolam, and now they had to sit. Says the Ben Yoyada in his commentary on Megillah, Kidei shalimud Torah yala lehem b'tircha. As Chazal say, Yogati umatzasi tam. Tircha, an extra tircha by standing. Again, our yeshivas are called yeshiva because we live in the post-Rabbi Gamliel generation. And here we turn to the Yavitz on page 438. Rav Yaakov Emden says the following. Lo yidrosh Hashem imenu, God does not demand from us, yidiyas haTorah. Again, I'm not going to tell you that everybody's going to agree with Rav Yosef Engel on this. He says, Ki im lefi hachonas kol echad v'echad. Some people could work hard in order to study Mikra, others Mishnah, others Gemara. Hakol lefi kochosa, says Rav Yaakov Emden. Ukeish gvurasa. Misha v'kocho lasok b'negoyim v'olos. And we had a sugya today called a sandal hamuchlat for chalitza. It has to do with negoyim. Olos. Probably the most complicated Masechta in Shas. Thank God it's not part of Daf Yomi. We lucked out. Rav Shapiro was compassionate, so he left out Taros, except for Nida. Okay, he got us there. Really, very hard. Olos. Reb Chaim Sefer on the Rambam is almost 40% of all on Olos, of all the great insights of Reb Chaim. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, a person is capable of delving into the deepest part of Torah, of throwing himself, body and soul, into studying the Goyim and Olos. But instead, all he does is study Agadah. He likes it. You know, the Gemara tells stories. Sometimes we understand the Agadah, sometimes we don't. He's very laid back about it. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, such a person, mi'et amel, hanidrash mimenu, and I'm afraid to read the next three words, v'lo kiye mitzvasa. And the Baal Hatanya, the Alter Rebbe in his famous Hilchas Talmud Torah, meaning of probably any section that's most famous in what we call the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, is Hilchas Talmud Torah. V'sheyachol laharbos lahosif b'limud with Yegiya, v'ligdol b'Torah, v'ena osikein mishum shechas al tirchaso. In a word, he's lazy. Bocher lo derech kala, he looks for the easy way out, kala with a kuf. V'chozer al rishonos, he doesn't want to learn anything new. He constantly reviews that which he knows. It's a cinch. He He prefers the easy way out, militroach b'limud chadash. Instead of expanding his horizons and learning new Torah that he never studied, which require a tremendous amount of work. Again, I can't read the next few words. You'll have to read it yourself. So the Gemara tells us that mevatlim Talmud Torah lemikra Megillah, and all the Mefarshim have problems with this. What do you mean mevatlim Talmud Torah? That's not Bittul Torah. You're reading the Megillah. Megillah is one of the Chaf Dalet Kisvei HaKodesh. Why is that called Bittul Torah? Mafsikim b'limud Talmud Torah lemikra Megillah. Says the Aruch HaShulchan that you're on your way to hear the Megillah together with the Tzibur, so there's going to be an element of Bittul Torah. Comes along the Beis Ephraim. I think his name was Margolios. Okay, it doesn't say it here. And he says the following. Forget about the Aruch HaShulchan right now. I have a better shot in the Gemara. Mikra Megillah Amnam Divrei Torah. But Mikol Makom, if not for the significance of Pirsumei Nisa, of Purim, Lo Haya Matirin, they wouldn't be Matir Sheyil Lemisha Yachal Lilmod Mishnah Ugemara Biamkus Biyigia Laniach Es Yigias Halimud Shel Gemara V'Likros Hamagil. Ki Misha Mafsik Mi Limud Gemara. Someone who, instead of putting the Yigia in to delve into something challenging, complex, Lumdus is not easy. Aholech Lishmoa Mikra Megillah. Nice. I could almost read it by heart. I've heard it so many times. It's a great story. Every time I hear it, it's like new. I love it. Bittul Torah. That's called Bittul Torah. Could you imagine? He's studying Torah and he's guilty of Bittul Torah. Is lefichach nachta gemara b'loshem levatlim. That's called Bittul Torah. Now, there's a piece here, which again is very scary for me to say over, of the Tosas Rid. The Tosas Rid, at one point, in his commentary on Megillah, I think his name is Tarani, if I'm not mistaken, from an Italian family. He says that there's a tviya on Yonasan ben Uziel for translating Nevi'im, and the entire land of Israel shook. Arba Amos Parsal, when Yonasan ben Uziel, the great Yonasan ben Uziel, translated the Tanakh, the Novim. Zakta Tosas Rid, what's the tviyah here? Well, what's wrong with this? Adarabah. He made Nevi'im accessible. You and I know that to learn a pasuk in Yeshaya or even Yirmiyah for that matter, and translate it, understand it, it's like it's so difficult, so challenging. So you look in Targum Yonasan, you get an idea. Yeah, we don't know Aramaic, so that's our problem. Hatviyah hoisa al shegaram lemiut amola shel Torah. Lemiut mesiris nefesh lahavin es haksuvim. Unbelievable. I only wonder why Tosas Arid waited till Yonasan ben Uziel to make this comment. And what about Targum Onkelos, or the Gemara that deals with the Targum Shivim under the king? What was his name? Talmai HaMelech. Why not call that miut? What's the language here? Miut amola shel Torah. Shulchan Aruch writes the following: what should be a person's curriculum as he gets older and older? Seder limudo shel adam ketza. Tchila, yilmad Torah shebechsav. And then, after he finishes Torah shebechsav, he goes on to Mishnah. Shegia acher kach ledargas limud Gemara. V'schaded kishrono, he's very sharp now. V'yochel lahagdil b'talmud. Ifne kol yomav l'talmud bilvad. L'fi rochav libo v'yishuv daita. Now, you've all heard of the Rashash. The Rashash, 150 years ago, says that Misha rochav libo v'osek b'talmud ein lo lasok b'mikra. Again, today this is a whole issue. I'm not sure if you're aware of what goes on here, especially here in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure you have also in Canada, Tanakh Yomi and all this other stuff. But there's an entire movement here in Israel that wants to shift the emphasis from the learning of Gemara to the studying of Tanakh. I'm talking about people who wear kippah. I'm not talking about some sort of secular Zionist organization. But at least, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, again, you can always say, this Katnu Adoros, but the Shulchan Aruch describes a situation where he's exclusively dedicated, says the Rashash, to the study of Gemara, of Talmud, the Ein Lo Lasok B'Mikra. I think the answer to this is, how do you learn Mikra? If you learn Mikra B'Yigia on a deeper level, and I'm not talking about using all these, secular methods and tools. I don't know. That's an issue which I can't wrap my head around. But if you really learn Tanakh well and thoroughly, B'Yigia with questions and answers and chidushim and insight, and there's so much to learn, that's a different story. But he's not talking about that, Rashash. He's talking about people who like to read Tanakh. It's very light, it's very interesting, a lot of bloody stories in Tanakh. Ein lo lasok b'mikra. Shelagabav, relevant to somebody like him who can study Gemara, Bittul Torah yechash. He's learning Tanakh. Bittul Torah, Geval. But that's how he sees the Shulchan Aruch. When the Shulchan Aruch says you got into this more advanced stage, you don't have to study Mikra, devote yourself exclusively to the study of Gemara. As I state in Shulchan Aruch, says Rashash, because that's Bittul Torah if he dedicates himself to Mikra when he had the opportunity to study Megoyim and Olamos. Interesting, he quotes the Pele Yoetz. The Pele Yoetz, I think his name was Papo or something like that. He was a moralist. He was a Baal Musar. And a lot of his Musar is very almost mystical in nature, a lot of Kabbalah. I was so shocked that the Pele Yoetz, he quotes it from Chelik Beis. He writes, Misha Yochel Lilmod Halachos Upilpulim. Pilpulim means in-depth study. The Osek Be'amiras Tehillim, he's a Tehillim Zogger. Nechshav Bitul Torah Legabe. I never thought it would reach the Pele Yoetz. And now we look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin Ayin Tes, interpreting the pasuk in Mishlei Tesvav. Nefesh Amel Amalo ki akef alav piu, echo for love piu. Amar Yitzchak, hu amel b'makom zeh, v'toraso omeleslo b'makom acher. I'm not sure I understand every word in Rashi, but let's give it a shot. Maybe part of this Rashi you'll explain. Rashi says the following. What does it mean, Toraso Omeles Lo b'makom acher? I mean, he was Omel b'Torah here, and the Torah is going to work overtime for him on his behalf there. Toraso Shalomad Mechazeres olov. It's like the Torah is some sort of existing being. It's an entity. Umevakeshes me'eis kone. Now, what does that mean, me'eis kone? The only thing I can say is maybe he means the maker, the capital M. But you'll tell me what he means, me'eis kone. Limsar lo tame Torah v'Israel. The Torah itself that he studied will seek out an energy force, if you will, to give and transmit in the hearts of this Torah study, to Torah student, the Tamei Torah and the Sisrei Torah. V'kol kach lama, why? Lefisha kafaf piu al divrei Torah. He worked very hard to direct all his words. He could have, what we call shoot the breeze. He could have done this, he could have done that, he could have read books, give lectures. He's an intelligent guy, a scholar. He's very academic, but instead he was chafaf piu al divrei Torah. And for such a person, the Torah itself will reveal its ta'amim and its nistaros, its secret, concealed meanings. Now, David and his son Shlomo both describe the beauty of Torah in two psukim, one pasuk in Tehillim and the other in Mishnah. But with a careful analysis and comparison to these two psukim, we'll see a fantastic insight of the Chafetz Chaim. David HaMelech describes Torah as nechmadim mizahav umipaz rav, right? Paz is a very expensive kind of gold. Shlomo, on the other hand, yikarahi mipninim. Pnimim are precious stones, like, what do you call it? Pearls. Why does Shlomo change the metaphor of his father to Zav, from Zav to Pninim? Says the Chafetz Chaim that Shlomo wants to teach us not the greatness of Torah, what we call Yikrutza Shel Torah, but how should we study Torah? Page 440. The Derech Limuda. He says the following. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Chagiga Daf Tes, there are two students in the class. One student reviews his lesson 100 times, the other 101 times. The one who adds 101th time, he's called the Oved Elokim, the true, genuine servant of God. That's what Shlomo HaMelech wants to tell us. The word pnimim, precious stones, is radically different than zav. And this is true for diamonds as well. So the pnimim refers to diamonds. What is the significance of comparing Torah to diamonds? He says the following. He says, you measure diamonds. I want to wish an Aliyas Neshama. It's is your father's Yartime?
Yes.
Oh, your father's Yartime. I never met your father, but I remember the picture in your living room. I still remember the picture.
Yeah,
he came from Hungary, did he not?
Yeah.
No. How many Jews survived from Hungary? Okay, should be an Aliyas Neshama. And if you have one of those croissants, with the glazed, those big ones, you'll save one for me. Okay. He says the following: how do we measure and evaluate a diamond in carats? Not a carrot that a rabbit eats. And he says the following: let's say you evaluate a diamond because it has, let's say, 2 carats. He gives an example at 1,000 shekel. So you would anticipate that if it was 4 carats, it would be 2,000 shekel, right? You double the carats and you double the value. He says it's not so. A diamond that is 2 carats is fundamentally different than a diamond that has 4 carats. And the price of the value of the diamonds is going to increase exponentially. That's what happens in Torah. And this is what Shlomo Melech wants to teach us. After all, one Talmud reviewed his lesson 100 times, the other 101 times. Okay, add 0.01. No. There was only one additional shinun. Ein erech limudo nimdad lefia yachas. It's like pninim. It's like diamonds. Tosefes hamea v'achas. Erka gadol pi kama v'kama. He becomes an Oved Elokim. You don't judge it quantitatively, but qualitatively. And in quality, there's a fundamental difference. That 101 teaches us how much his desire, his craving for Torah is so intense. He becomes an Oved Elokim. He wrote on it his will that we should take this limud to heart. Lasok b'Torah. Yigiyah b'Torah. And that will guarantee that we will retain our Torah study, and the schar will be commensurate to our amelus b'Torah, Kedi Ratzon. Amen. Mitzvah Hashem, next week we'll study Birchas HaTorah, which is a fascinating topic. And I think, David, you've already sent out most of the pages.
Well, everyone you asked me to.
I'm saying, I think you've already. I know. I'm giving you a week off. I think I never know what I'll get up to, so I always ask for a little bit of a far, a little bit of.
Just in case, yeah.
Just in case. All right, then. Be well. Everyone should be well. Great having you and great learning with you. Thank you so much.
Oh,